Hey, hey, look who's back. Are you ready for another ride on the adventure that is your city and county? I hope you're paying attention and not just being a bystander, because the world is rapidly changing in front of our eyes. Reproductive rights, gay, queer, and trans rights, and more militarized policing around the country. Tune in and see what's happening around you. Welcome back. My name is Megan, and I'm so glad to see you here watching our show.
And I'm Andy. Please like, share, and comment on our videos. It really helps keep the engagement up, and we all need to be part of the civic process, whether that's on the ground with mutual aid work or demanding better from our supposed leadership. What role are you taking on?
And if you have the money, even if it's as little as $5, you can contribute to the cause. You can donate to the Tampa Bay Abortion Fund. You can sign up to be a monthly or annual donor for the Restorative Justice Coalition. You can make a donation for the Tampa Bay Colorful Revolutionary Collective's mutual aid pop-ups. Those are only a few quick examples.
This work isn't going to get done by itself.
Exactly. Hurricane season is here, and I know as Floridians, we like to make jokes about hurricanes. And hey, if you need to have a little humor to cope, we get it. But remember, the houseless community, the housing insecure, low-income Black and Indigenous communities, those in public housing and manufactured home parks, and some of our elderly and disabled neighbors are often the hardest hit by even tropical storm level weather.
This is why we're urging you to get prepared for yourself and for your neighbors. If you have the funds or resources, make sure you have battery-powered radios, flashlights with batteries, canned foods you can eat, and snacks. On top of that, make sure you have a few gallons of water on hand.
It's best to prepare for a storm now before a hurricane warning is issued, because these stores go wild and it can be difficult to find supplies that you need. But also remember, think about the elderly, disabled, and or otherwise vulnerable people in our neighborhood, community, family, and friend network, and so on.
Find out if they have the means to create a disaster kit. Remember, never assume someone is not able, but it's always okay to ask. If they can't get one or aren't sure, and you have the means, please help them prepare a disaster kit.
For your household and vulnerable people in the community, be sure to get enough of any life-saving medications that you might need on hand when a hurricane watch first happens. You'll want to make sure that you and those that you know who need them have the medications they need on hand in the event a disaster is serious enough to result in evacuation or any disruption in the local medical care system.
This includes medications such as diabetes medication, heart medication, seizure prevention, HIV treatment, and also HIV prevention medications like PrEP. Or for our trans and gender nonconforming friends, this could also include testosterone, estrogen, or other gender-affirming medications. For those who need it, this could also include birth control and menstrual care medications and devices.
You should also ensure that you have allergy medications and treatment for anyone in your household that may need them if you are forced into a shelter where different allergens may inevitably arise.
You should begin mapping out possible shelters you would go to if that fit your situation now, such as if you have pets, disability auxiliaries you will need to bring, elderly and or children. If you're houseless, you should know where to start heading in town if a warning should be issued. You want to be closer to the shelter before the warning is issued, because public transportation may cease at that point.
As Hillsborough County continues to grow, it's important to watch changes announced to the evacuation zones. The Hillsborough County Board of Commissioners released a statement on June 15th advising that nearly 75,000 residents have now been mapped into an evacuation zone when previously they had not been.
According to the report, this update was made in response to the data from the 2020 census and the latest sea, lake, and overland surge from hurricanes models provided by the National Hurricane Center.
Be sure to check out what evacuation zone your residence is and what the different zones, for example Zone A or Zone B, mean for you and your family. Preparing early can save lives.
You can find more information about evacuation zones and disaster kits on the county website hcflgov.net/staysafe. You're probably wondering what the latest update is on the housing crisis.
We really wish we could have come to you with the news that guaranteed housing for all has become policy in Tampa, but that won't happen until the people can get mass organized as one entity on one collective mission.
That would mean we'd have to put some differences aside, end the idea of political purity and perfection, and actually come together on this topic. Until then, will continue to fight for progress in a piecemeal way.
On June 16th, Florida Rising and several other community activists came to make public comment to echo demands previously made. The primary topic of focus was enacting part of a Miami-Dade Tenant Bill of Rights.
On May 13th, the Miami-Dade Tenant Bill of Rights went into effect. One such item on that Bill of Rights was the creation of a Tenant Advocate Office. The Tenant Advocate Office will serve as the clearinghouse for tenants needing assistance or filing complaints.
We originally pushed for the Tenant Advocate Office to have a guarantee of general representation when we signed on to a demand letter with the People's Council of Tampa, which was sent to the City Council on May 15th. Guaranteed representation would change the power dynamics between landlords and the tenants by ensuring tenants could actually enforce their rights.
City Attorney Rebecca Johns provided her presentation on the research for the Tenant Advocate Office in Miami and found that it does not come with a guarantee for legal representation as we originally thought and hoped.
Before we talk about that, we'll talk about what the Advocate Office in Miami does do and what Councilmember Maniscalco motioned to be heard as a first draft ordinance on August 4th.
As Justin Garcia from Creative Loafing reports, the Miami Tenant Advocate Office serves as a program to hold landlords accountable within the Miami County boundaries.
City Attorney Rebecca Johns found that the Miami Tenant Advocate Office, while it doesn't come with legal representation, it does serve as a single point of contact for tenants who need either eviction prevention assistance or help filing a complaint against their landlord.
Currently, if you're a tenant in Tampa and you have a need for assistance or a violation of your rights, it can be difficult to know who to call. It could be the Tampa Housing Authority, or it could be a state or federal agency. It could also be the local Human Rights Board for certain discrimination claims. Further, renters often do not know of the different city, county, state, and federal programs that are available to them in their current situation.
By being able to find all of the resources in one hotline, it'll save those in need time. When you're facing inability to pay rent or a violation of your renter's rights, time is of the essence, and being able to locate the right program or complaint form quickly will be useful to tenants. Further, it'll help those with accessibility issues file complaints or retrieve assistance. And while all of that is good and seems to be a worthy investment, it doesn't go nearly far enough. We need a tenant advocate office that provides legal representation for tenants. The good news is the Miami office does inform tenants of their legal rights and can refer to the few existing legal resources we have today, but we need more.
According to the Miami Workers Center, 90% of Miami's landlords are represented, while 2% of Miami's tenants are. And we imagine Hillsborough County and the city of Tampa have similar numbers. Miami's Workers Center also notes that the right to counsel has been implemented in other major cities.
In San Francisco, 67% of tenants who were provided with legal representation stayed in their homes, and 86% of New York City tenants with legal representation did as well, the Miami Workers Center cites.
They also cite some facts on the guaranteed right to counsel. For every $1 spent on eviction defense, the cities see a $6 to $12 savings in the cost of societal and economic damage caused by houselessness and eviction. This is from a study for the Public Justice Center involving Baltimore City in 2020, cited by the Miami's Workers Center.
According to Miami Workers Center Instagram, they state Miami-Dade County Commissioners could fund a right to counsel program this year by including it on the county budget.
That means that we can do the same thing in Hillsborough County and the city of Tampa. In the city, the mayor will be doing her budget presentation in August, which will then go for final approval by the city council in September.
So, we need to get City Council on board with funding a right to counsel program. They can direct their city staff to research how such a program could come to exist and be implemented. It's not too late to make that part of our tenant advocate office.
But this will only happen with collective action. The Tenant Advocate Office first draft is August 4th. That means we all need to be on the phone, sending emails, and scheduling meetings with Mayor Jane Castor and the City Council members between now and August 4th. And demanding a route to general legal representation for all tenants in this year's budget.
Yes, that means you. Call City Council and the mayor and say something along the lines of, "My name is Megan and I live in insert area of city. I'm calling on you to include the legal right of representation for all tenants in Tampa as part of the Tenant Advocate Office or through another program. The legal right to counsel for tenants has been shown to be successful in cities such as San Francisco, where 67% of tenants with representation remained in their home or New York City, where 86% of tenants stayed in their home when represented. Cities that provide legal right to counsel for tenants see cost savings as well. For every $1 spent by a city on eviction defense, $6 to $12 of city funds are saved from handling houselessness or other societal ills caused by eviction. These are statistics cited by the Miami Workers Center. Thank you, and I hope you'll take the idea of legal representation for all tenants seriously.
It's also important to note that T-Band signed on to the People's Council demand letter that included much more than just the tenant advocate office, but rather a whole package of necessary tenant rights, and even some funding demands for the houselessness crisis.
Such provisions that did pass in Miami but were not even discussed by the City Council was a provision that prohibits discrimination on past evictions within certain parameters, a much-needed tool to help disrupt the cycle of poverty and houselessness in Tampa.
Another provision was the right to deduct expenses for repairs if your landlord fails to act within 7 days, within certain parameters. That means if you have to go repair your counter, sink, toilet, or whatever because your landlord failed to act, you'll be able to deduct those expenses from your next rent bill.
Those provisions would strengthen tenant rights and make the tenant advocate office all the more useful, as it would be designed to inform tenants on how to enforce their rights.
Councilmember Hertalk in May motioned for the city to research a landlord complaint registry that currently exists in Gainesville. City Attorney Rebecca Johns also presented some research on this item.
Currently, the Tampa City Council are under the impression that they have no authority to send in city inspectors into properties with more than 5 units, which would mean most apartment complexes. Due to this understanding, the city has not been able to act on enforcement of city code and can't issue fines. They say that this is due to state law preemption.
But what was interesting is the landlord complaint registry in Gainesville, according to City Attorney Rebecca Johns, does not seem to be restricted based on size. According to Johns, if a complaint is filed to this registry, the city of Gainesville is able to send out inspectors and issue fines to bad acting landlords. If this is true, that would change the power dynamics in Tampa for the better.
This would mean that the tenant advocate office could serve as a hotline to take complaints. The registry would be online, and every landlord has to pay to register each property they own. If complaints are filed, the complaints are public record, meaning we the people can do a little background checking on prospective landlords. We'd be able to see the nature of complaints.
So what is the truth then? If Gainesville can send compliance inspectors and issue fines for units of all sizes, could Tampa? When Councilmember Hertalk asked that question, she was notified that the city was coming to the table with that research on July 14th. So we're going to keep an eye on that.
All of these efforts combined could make an impact on rights enforcement for tenants in Tampa.
But what about the other items the People's Council demanded?
Along with Florida Rising, the People's Council, which includes us at T-Band, demanded that the city declare a housing emergency. At People's Council, we're calling for a vote on rent control. Other groups have been using the term rent stabilization, which may be different.
The conversation around rent control and a housing emergency, although mentioned in public comment, was not discussed by the City Council on June 16th.
They also did not discuss any intention of building an unconditional community-led Housing First program. We are asking the city to invest $40 million as a starting point into a Housing First program that is unconditional and not faith-based. This will begin the steps for solving the houselessness crisis in Tampa.
What is Housing First? It's a really simple concept. According to endhomelessness.org, Housing First is a model of caring for the houseless by providing them houses. I know, simple, right? End homelessness by providing homes to those who want them.
From endhomelessness.org, Housing First does not require people experiencing homelessness to address all of their problems, including behavioral health problems, or to graduate through a series of services, programs before they can access housing. Housing First does not mandate participation in services either before obtaining housing or in order to retain housing. Visit their website for the full definition.
It's important to understand Housing First as a concept first, because it does require the removal of a number of societal biases we have. Often even the best of intentioned homeless care programs require, directly or indirectly, conditions like sobriety, religion, gainful employment, and near perfect criminal histories or futures. to make someone deserving of a house.
Exactly. We have to remember every human being is worthy of a house and start from there. Research shows punitive housing, such as housing you can only keep if you remain sober, doesn't cut it for most people in recovery. Nobody deserves to have their house being used as a condition for certain behaviors. How is that healing for anybody?
Cities across the United States have done housing first and found substantial reduction in policing resources and complaints in the first place. You can read about the effectiveness of Housing First on the Restorative Justice Coalition's website and how Housing First is truly public safety.
As an example, the SAFE program, previously the Crime-Free Multi-Housing Program, resulted in evictions for mostly Black community members in East Tampa. That is the opposite of Housing First. The city leaders, some on the record, basically said that they lost their right to housing for criminal charges, not even convictions, some as low level as traffic offenses.
If we believe that housing is a guaranteed right for all, then it is for all. Whether or not they use drugs, are in a profession we don't approve of, have a criminal history, or lack documentation, we need to mean what we say and start advocating for housing first as a solution.
On June 21st, Mayor Castor announced in a joint press conference with Councilmember Lynn Hertog that she is introducing a housing advocacy hotline, one that mirrors what the People's Council and Florida Rising began advocating for in May.
According to this press conference, the mayor's version would serve as a one point of contact clearinghouse, which would ease tenants' ability to access resources and file complaints. Councilmember Hertog states that the mayor's hotline will not replace the work in progress for the Tenants Advocacy Office.
During the press conference, it was stated that this program is what they called a stopgap and a test drive for the eventual Tenant Advocacy Office that may be proposed by the City Council in August.
At the end of the day, Tampa Bay Activist Network doesn't care who starts the hotline, as long as it is available to assist us, the people, but a tenant advocate office was never intended to be the only solution. So we hope they understand this as a concession on a path towards more.
Exactly. Across the country, we're seeing reforms like right to counsel pass, as we talked about earlier. So we cannot stop until we get right to counsel, and then even then, we couldn't stop there either.
It's long haul work, and it's going to be building blocks at a time, which is frustrating. But the reality is, as you begin advocating on issues as a community, you build networking power for resources. You build community relationships. You casually and then formally can build study groups.
At the end of the day, as you'll learn as community activists, all the issues from housing to climate to workers' rights and so on are interconnected. Some may be more relevant or direct in your life, some may not.
But organizing around the issues that you are most passionate about and doing your part to unweave that web of oppression can create a ton of active relief and inspiration in activists fighting for other causes, like clean energy. Often their solutions are interconnected in some way as well.
So, what are we saying? It can feel overwhelming to feel like you have to be an expert on every issue since they're connected. But the good news is that you don't have to. You can absolutely be dedicated in your specific area of interest. Let's say it be housing, and put your heart and soul into that. We need that passion, and there's enough of it to go around for each of the causes near and dear to us. Individually, you can't do it all, but all of us together can do it all.
But dramatic reforms for things like housing, so central to the organization of societal, racial, and class structures, will require all hands on deck, with passionate activists able to focus on solutions for this very material need. People can organize better when they have secured, guaranteed housing for themselves and for their families.
Our homework assignment for you all is to keep reading on Housing First and housing as a human right for all, and become experts on this discussion with your neighbor, family, friends, and faith organizations. We need you in this fight for humanity.
News Channel 8 reports that some residents in South Tampa were subjected to harmful, violent, vitriol, and anti-Semitic hate in early June. The hate messages were left for residents in the Hyde Park area in the form of a flyer. This section may be triggering, so feel free to fast forward and come back at a better time.
It's always scary times when we see such direct and open hatred spread in the community. The flyers displayed anti-Semitic messages, including blaming the pandemic on Jewish people.
According to News Channel 8, the Tampa Jewish Community Center and Federation believe that the flyers were distributed by a known white supremacist group in the area. They stated that groups in the area have been known to do these anti-Semitic flattering tours in pieces, covering certain geographical areas at a time.
The Florida Holocaust Museum tells News Channel 8 that the flyers' false assertions to Jewish control and conspiracy of world events such as the pandemic are related to ancient anti-Semitism, which have been responsible for harm and often fatal violence towards Jewish people for millennia.
As always, in the community, watch out for one another. Don't be a bystander if you witness harm toward a marginalized group. Speak up about problems in your community and build relationships with your neighbors.
The Tampa Police Department have elevated to yet another honor to their service. That's right, a Buzzfeed article. In mid-June, Buzzfeed reporter Kavitha Sarana reports on a police officer who had aspirations to change policing from the inside.
Which, of course, plot twist, the officer wasn't able to change policing from the inside. But some of the information he has to tell us now can be useful in our community discussions on defund and abolition.
Right, so the story centers on a black police officer in Tampa, Florida, and to summarize a bit, but we do encourage you to read the article, the officer in question can recall observing other officers botch evidence by cutting corners.
Wait, Megan, did you say TPD officers were cutting corners? Let's give the audience some time to recover from that.
Right, incredibly shocking. At one point in the article, we learn that the officer in question, his name Jerry Weish, by the way, goes to Internal Affairs. He goes to report the treatment of black community members by police and other issues. From there, we learn about how the Internal Affairs system has historically harmed and maligned black TPD personnel.
BuzzFeed reports that 20 black employees of TPD, some current and some former employees, were interviewed. Many describe the culture at TPD that, as BuzzFeed says, pushes black officers out of the profession and perpetuates police tactics that have left the city's black residents overpoliced and underserved for decades.
Unsurprisingly, the Tampa Police Department was described by some black employees as a good old boy system, a system that is made up of seasoned white middle managers, trainers, all of whom can influence promotions, disciplinary action, and tactics.
Of course, Police Chief O'Connor is there talking about how she's gonna go on listening tours or something. To me, it's just more of the same. And this officer's story is all the more reason we need to look at alternatives for funding.
Recently in Miami, a new program titled the Freedom House Mobile Crisis Response and Free Urgent Care was introduced this June. In an article by the Tampa Bay Times, Dr. Armin Henderson states individuals experiencing a mental health crisis are 16 times more likely to be shot and killed upon police arrival.
Like, why is anybody getting shot at as a response to a mental health crisis? And we know the trajectory is worse if you are black, indigenous, and or transgender and experience a mental health crisis.
Since 2020, through our collective work with the People's Safety Coalition, we began advocating for a mental health community response program similar to Cahoots in Eugene, Oregon. We've talked about it a number of times on this show.
Since 1989, Cahoots has responded to mental health and community crisis without the help of police in 98% of their calls. They've been able to do this without major injuries or fatalities in the community.
Tampa leadership last year behind closed doors decided on a co-response program, largely championed by Mayor Castor. A co-response program means that mental health counselors report on scene with police, but with statistics like what we cited earlier, how does that really help?
Exactly. And a co-response program will only create more distrust between historically and presently marginalized communities and the mental health community. People who don't trust the police, reasonably so, can't expect to heal or use services connected to the police.
We're optimistic about the program in Miami, but of course, if you know anything, let us know in the comments. How do we get a program like this in Tampa? It's going to require organized people making demands. We can't settle for co-response programs. We need an autonomous, community-led Cahoots-like program like Miami.
So every time you see the mayor or a city council member, get on them and get their commitment to developing a similar program here. Taking direct input from BIPOC communities in Tampa, including queer and transgender people of color. Make calls and send emails, and stop by to make public comment on this issue as often as you can.
News Channel 8 reports that a local nonprofit in Tampa nets $1 million in a year selling desserts. That wouldn't be so bad, except reports show this nonprofit might have abused their clients into making those dessert sales.
According to the article, a nonprofit known as Hogar Risa would work in parking lots to sell flan and pound cakes, all for the purpose of raising funds for a drug treatment program.
Sales is considered to be one of this nonprofit's drug treatment philosophies. The pastor of the group told News Channel 8 that sales are part of their 16-month residential program.
Remember previously when we talked about non-faith-based unconditional housing first? This is partly why. People in drug treatment that make their housing conditional on successful treatment are certainly vulnerable to mistreatment. We all would be if our shelter was at risk.
A former resident interviewed told News Channel 8 that the pressure of dessert sales, including being screamed at over low sales, made it difficult to manage his addiction. Another resident referred to the treatment program as a work camp.
The article also cites some questions about where the nonprofit's funds are truly going. The only way to end this kind of direct exploitation is making sure there's no way to exploit in the first place.
Guaranteed housing as a right, not conditional on sobriety or other false measurements of worthiness, is public safety and protects vulnerable people. We have to keep stressing it because news stories like this just make it more and more obvious.
Tampa Police Department conducted yet another forum on violent crime. Bay News 9 reports that the forum, held in a parking lot at East Side Deli and Grocery in East Tampa, involved a number of discussions related to violent crime.
The chief of police, Mary O'Connor, reported to the forum that firearm offenses are down 50% from this time last year. Some community members in attendance told the police representatives that they'd like to see more recreation options and career program options for young people in the area.
Pastor Doug Walker is quoted in Bay News 9 by stating that communities that are well-resourced are the safest communities. That not only makes sense, but it's also been studied time and time again.
In response, Tampa Police Department ran a no questions asked buyback program on June 25th. So I guess that's their solution. Come and talk about violent crime and listen again and again, buy back some guns, and call it a day.
The real solutions have been in what we've talked about on this program for the last year. Reallocating resources, as the pastor pointed out, is what will make East Tampa safe. We've been talking about housing first frequently. We talk about a non-connected, non-police mobile crisis response team frequently, because these are where the solutions begin.
They begin by reducing the amount of interactions between police and the community. Time and time again, we see that over-policing neighborhoods does not create a culture of safety. It creates a culture of surveillance, distrust, and further oppression. Internalized oppression, external oppression, it's bad, and we have the power to stop it.
Dr. Marshall Rosenberg was once quoted as saying, "Violence is a tragic expression of unmet needs." We know violence is a symptom. People are not inherently violent. And Stop the Violence forums by police departments have a tendency to perpetuate the myth of black on black crime, whether directly or indirectly.
Black on black crime is one of many demonizing myths that dehumanizes black people with an idea of inherent violence in our communities.
The Southern Poverty Law Center cited black on black crime as one of the biggest lies in the white supremacist propaganda playlist. These are just things you need to be aware of on the discussion of violent crime.
And those solutions aren't going to come from Tampa Police Department. We've already talked through a few of the solutions in the past few episodes, but we'll say it again. Healthcare, housing, nutritious food and clean water, access to quality education, jobs, paying livable wages. These are the community solutions to violent crime.
And that is the main idea behind defund the police and refund the community. Removing our dependency and normalization of policing and moving them into systems based in care with more community input.
It's not an immediate overnight solution where one day there isn't policing. It's a gradual system of building. And yes, abolition movement actually is about building. We have so many things we need to build, and soon, but instead we keep repeating the cycle with more and more policing and forums.
In a June 2020 New York Times article, abolition organizer Miriam Kaba says we need to reduce the power of the police by cutting budgets and reducing the number of officers. This is not to abandon communities to violence, but rather to begin redirecting funds and resources towards healthcare, housing, education, and good jobs.
This type of reallocation will show a gradual shift in policing in our society and improve safety. We can create restorative justice models for response to conflicts in neighborhoods, mental health crisis, and other situations. We've seen these work in other areas.
Exactly. Miriam Kaba says in the article, when people, especially white people, consider a world without the police, they envision a society as violent as our current one, merely without law enforcement. But that's why we talk about the things we do, because we need all of us to have a vision of a society of abundance. That in itself will gradually make policing more and more obsolete.
But this kind of thing won't happen on its own. The criminal justice system as it stands is big business, locally and nationally. So we need to put the pressure on the city leaders to prioritize the budget differently and stand down to propaganda.
Going a bit further, Tampa Police Department released a statement announcing their Safer Summer Initiative.
According to the notice placed on Tampa Police Department's own website, the program is a warrant roundup that has already resulted in 69 arrests.
The Alamo Motel was one area that was targeted in the Safer Summer Initiative that led to 6 individuals facing arrest for drug charges, some involving armed trafficking. This also prompted a search in Roadway Inn off of Bush Boulevard.
On June 11th, Tampa Police Department arrested 5 individuals on narcotics-related charges, including for various drugs deemed illegal by state and federal law, such as cocaine, methadone, and MDMA, among others. Chief O'Connor seems excited about these arrests and states this is making our entire city safer.
We know by now that the war on drugs isn't making anybody safer. Decriminalizing drugs and looking at addiction as a public health matter instead of a criminal matter is a step towards viable solutions. Narcotics busting may make the headlines and make policing look exciting, but in reality, it's just repeating cycles and waste resources.
It's a nuanced subject and one we definitely need to get into, but we won't be able to do all of that now. But once we start looking at drugs and crimes, often centered around them from a different angle, we might start to get different solutions.
Speaking of crime, Justin Garcia from Creative Loafing brings us yet another scandal from another class act in the Tampa Police Department. This time, from retired Tampa Police Captain Ashley Roberts.
As Creative Loafing reports, Captain Roberts was off duty and was going to town on some drinks at Busch Gardens. I mean, who hasn't been there? This happened on October 24th, 2021, and is based upon a report from the Citizen Review Board. Now, there's nothing wrong with going to Busch Gardens and getting drunk, but the way you act afterwards, that's a different story, especially if you try to abuse your power.
Captain Richards apparently really wanted to ride Cobra's Curse, a roller coaster, but decided to cut the line and use the quick queue line without a special pass. The line attendant advised her that was against the rules and that she couldn't cut the line.
Cut in line? I mean, I feel like that was a lesson in kindergarten, but maybe we need to include it in the Tampa Police Department orientation. Now, for perspective, Creative Loafing tells us that guests at Busch Gardens can pay $15 to $20 on top of their regular entry fee to gain access to the quick queue. Captain Roberts and her non-police friends did not feel that they should have to pay that steep fee, apparently.
After being denied by the line attendant, Captain Roberts got physical. Internal Affairs Detective Jason Gain told the Citizens Review Board that Captain Roberts pulled out her badge wallet with the badge missing and said that was her pass for the quick queue line, Creative Loafing reports.
This happened on October 24th, 2021, while Roberts was still employed as a police officer, but off duty. Look, we have compassion for people who have used substance and caused harm or done something embarrassing, but we don't stand for police officers trying to abuse their power. On October 26, 2021, after an internal affairs complaint was filed, Captain Roberts resigned from Tampa Police Department.
For some odd reason, Busch Gardens only ejected her for the day instead of trespassing her. So, good luck, employees of Busch Gardens. The findings to this investigation came before the Citizens Review Board on May 24th.
Currently, the Citizen Review Board can only review closed internal affairs cases and have no impact on discipline.
Reallocation of funds from policing into community resources. That's where the solution lies. I will keep saying it.
You may recall previous reporting we had done on the tragic, deplorable conditions in a predominantly black apartment complex known as Silver Oaks.
Justin Garcia from Creative Loafing reported on the human rights travesty that happened right here in Tampa at Silver Oaks. His reporting comes along with the hard work of tireless black women who refuse to stay silent in the face of dejection, including Alicia Oates.
Miss Oates has been a pivotal voice in accountability and calling attention to this tragedy. In June, County Commissioner Kimberly Overman and the City of Tampa's director and contract administrator at the Tampa Housing Authority informed the public that Cambridge Management, who manages Silver Oaks, is being removed from ownership.
This is due to a rating of 57C by HUD, the federal department that oversees certain affordable housing properties. As Creative Loafing reports, HUD considers anything below a 60 to be a failing grade. A C next to the number means that residents were living in life-threatening conditions.
It is unacceptable and no accident that this occurred in a primarily black apartment complex in East Tampa. We're telling you, these things don't happen by mistake. They're very intentional. But what they rely on is silence from the community and from the allies. And we cannot afford silence. It costs us too much.
County Commissioner Overman says, according to Creative Loafing, that she's keeping an eye on other properties in the county owned by Cambridge Management and collaborating with other public officials on a response to this.
It is important to know that media attention was brought into this issue back in April, and it's now June. It's great Cambridge is being replaced by Arco Management Corporation in July, but think about how so many people had to live in squalor in the meantime.
It's problems like these that we hope to see right to counsel for all tenants and actionable landlord registries, so we can react to these problems much quicker. This is utterly unacceptable, and each government official involved kept pointing the finger at other government bodies. We need solutions, not blame.
Of course, we know, based on an April report by Creative Loafing, that at least 2 other properties operated by Cambridge Management are also reported to have less than stellar conditions. These apartments include Jackson Heights Apartments in East Tampa and Columbus Courts Apartments in West Tampa.
How landlords allow people to live in these deplorable conditions and sleep at night is beyond me.
Florida Politics reports that County Commissioner Gwen Myers, who serves in District 3, has qualified for re-election with no opposition, thus guaranteeing her re-election into her next term as County Commissioner.
On June 2nd, the County Commission voted to have county staff draft an ordinance requiring landlords provide at least 60 days notice for non-renewal of leases or any rent increases. In addition, the ordinance would include 30 days notice provided by the tenant or landlord before terminating a month-to-month lease, according to the Hillsborough County Commission's newsroom.
Of course, this mirrors a similar ordinance passed in the city, so we're seeing some replication there. Although I think we can all agree 60 days is not nearly enough, especially with rent increases of this caliber. The county version was motioned by Commissioners Overman and Kemp and passed 5-1, with Commissioner Stacy White voting no.
Additional American Rescue Plan Act funds were distributed by the County Commission at the June 2nd meeting. Remember, that's our money.
Right, so on June 2nd, the Board of County Commissioners approved $24 million to go into affordable housing. According to notes from the meeting's recap found on their website, the funds would be used to acquire and renovate 1 or more properties for affordable housing. Kind of vague, if you ask me.
In addition, on June 2nd, with a 6-0 unanimous vote, meaning someone was missing, the Board of County Commission directed the staff to bring back what they called best case scenarios for addressing the issue of mold in the residential properties. The commissioners would like to know the best course of action to implement to resolve the issue via ordinance. I think we can all get behind that.
$3 million was approved by a Commissioner White and Cohen motion and 7-0 vote for the funding of a new pickleball project. Pickleball? Recreation is important, but I mean, when it comes to rescue funds, shouldn't we be, rescuing the people?
And most disappointingly, but not shockingly, the County Commission approved an American Rescue Plan Act funding agreement with the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office. A grand total of nearly $7 million out of the APRA funds alone are being distributed to the sheriff.
This comes from a Commissioner Cohen and Myers motion, both Democrats, I might add, and a unanimous 7-vote approval. According to the recap provided by the County Commission's website, $4.5 million will go to renovation and establishment of what is called a mental health pod at the county jails.
We're not exactly sure what a mental health pod entails, and our grassroots research didn't yield any results. But if you know, let us know. We do know this though. The jail system is not equipped to help people in mental health crisis. Even the best intentioned of mental health programs inside a jail will come with layers of coercion for incarcerated people needing this assistance.
Yes, we want to see everybody having access to mental wellness, but instead of investing more in jails, let's invest in what works, keeping people out of them. We can do that a number of ways. One would be a cahoots-like program not connected to the police or the criminal justice system.
If we provide goods and services in the community proactively instead of in jails reactively, we can save money and heartache on harms in the community substantially.
On June 15th, the Board of County Commission officially declared Juneteenth as Juneteenth National Freedom Day. Sad it took until 2022, but here we are.
And while recognition is nice, we need actual policy in place to materially benefit and heal the Black community in Hillsborough County, the nation, and quite frankly, the world.
And yes, we are talking about direct reparations as one of those options. On June 15th, the Board of County Commission unanimously approved a community land which they say can only be used for affordable housing endeavors that provide safe, secure, and affordable home ownership and rental opportunities.
While we primarily talk about the housing issue from a city standpoint, we know the issue is near and dear to everyone in the county, including Brandon, Riverview, Progress Village, and Wimauma, and so on.
Justin Garcia with Creative Loafing reports that the county has seen a 67% increase in senior citizen houselessness since 2018, only 4 years ago.
As the article tells us, in 2018, 296 elders, 62 and older, sought assistance due to houselessness in Hillsborough, which frankly was a high enough number. But in 2021, that number increased to 495.
62 and older? That's your grandparents. Imagine if it was your grandparents that had no housing. What would you do? How would you react? We gotta start taking these issues personal because at the end of the day, they are personal.
When asked what causes senior citizens the most trouble in finding housing, it was no surprise that CEO of Tampa Hillsborough Homeless Initiative, Antoinette Hayes Triplett, stated that money is the biggest barrier, with many elders relying on fixed income structures like Social Security.
Felicia Crosby Rucker, the director of Homeless and Community Services, informed Creative Loafing that more and more people are winding up living on the streets.
This is why the solution of housing first, we will keep saying it, is the only full-time permanent solution, and we need to take it seriously.
We need to watch local elections closely. We have a primary election for several county and state level positions coming in August. As we get closer to time, we'll have more information on the ballot and where to vote.
The Tiger Club got an earful on June 17th, according to Creative Loafing. One of the candidates for school board, Alicia Ali Marie Legge, who is running for District 6 countywide, joined 5 others in a panel discussion.
Much of her rhetoric and history is alarming, and we need to watch closely. Creative Loafing reports that Legge is involved in multiple right-wing anti-vaccine groups and takes a strong stance against what is known as critical race theory.
Essentially, she doesn't want real history taught because we know critical race theory isn't being taught in public schools, but it's being used as a scapegoat to not teach real history.
Incumbent Karen Perez responded by explaining critical race theory is taught at a university level and is not taught in the public school system.
Due to years-long advocacy of Tampa Indigenous communities and their allies, the Hillsborough County School Board voted 5-1 to change the mascot of Chamberlain High School based on a recommendation from the school's student government body, with only board member Melissa Snively dissenting.
A much welcome change being that the Chamberlain High School current mascot is that of an Indigenous chief, which many in the Indigenous community find to be cruel, disrespectful, and dehumanizing.
And while no community is a monolith, we stand in solidarity with the community at large who impacted this change.
According to News Channel 10, 6 schools changed their mascots in May 2019 in response to a request from the Title VI Native American Parent Advisory Council. Chamberlain High School and East Bay High School were the only 2 schools that did not accept the request.
Chamberlain alumni whined before the school board about how much the racist logo meant to them and how sad they are now that it's up to be removed. Meanwhile, the Florida Indigenous Alliance demonstrated outside to bring awareness to how horrific this kind of mascot and imagery is.
One such alumni was our fearless leader herself, the beacon of progressive hope, Mayor Jane Castor, a Chamberlain High School graduate. She was quoted by News Channel 10 as being proud of the history of Chamberlain and its mascot. She then compares having been a Chamberlain chief to that of having been the police chief of Tampa.
As of this time, East Bay High School has no immediate plans to change their racist logo.
Governor DeSantis is reported by The Intelligencer as being the most anti-vaccine governor in America.
I'm sure he's honored. 49 states and also the District of Columbia is accepting COVID-19 vaccinations for children under 5. Florida is the only state to refuse the vaccine.
And while DeSantis isn't very quick to address the housing crisis, News Channel 8 reports that the governor recently spoke at the Escambia County Sheriff's Office to sign Senate Bill 1808.
According to the governor, who was standing in front of a sign that said, "Biden's border crisis," the president is responsible for the problems we are facing at the border.
DeSantis goes on to claim that over 3 million people have illegally crossed the border from Mexico to U.S. since the change in administration.
He later goes on to discuss fentanyl as the leading cause of death in the U.S. due to what he says is Mexican drug cartels, one of the oldest but most effective xenophobic tropes.
At T-Ban, we know immigrants aren't causing our problems. Our problems are caused by the rich elite and unchecked corporate rule. And of course, white supremacy and cis-hetero patriarchy. But the reality doesn't matter. Do you see the pattern? You should.
Anti-trans and sports bill gets cisgender people all riled up about supposed unfair advantages in sports. Don't Say Gay bills have caused an uptick of violence at pride events all over the country, including Key West, and attacks on gay, bi, and queer people as child groomers, an age-old fear-mongering trope. Stop Woke attacks critical race theory and black and indigenous people in general.
And now come more attacks on immigrants. If you aren't seeing a pattern yet, you aren't paying attention. DeSantis is using the oldest trick in the book. Get the people outraged over the boogeyman, and they'll be too busy fighting gay and trans people, immigrants, and people of color to care about the economic failures in our state and country.
So what will Senate Bill 1808 do? In part, it would require all local law enforcement agencies that have county detention facilities, like HCSO, to enter written agreements with the Immigration and Customs Enforcement.
News Channel 8 informs us that the bill will force local governments to comply with immigration detainer policies. They must notify federal authorities before releasing any undocumented incarcerated individual from detention, and other requirements that will alert the federal government to the presence of undocumented persons.
It's important to understand that DeSantis' usage of drug fear is intentional. The war on drugs was designed to devastate black communities and disrupt movement work. But it was also designed to tighten border policies and has been incredibly effective at doing so.
Immigrants are scapegoated for the ills of our society, and xenophobic Americans get the illusion of safety. Meanwhile, immigration detention corporations and the prison industrial complex make bank and destroy families.
The Tallahassee Democrat reports that the Stop Woke Act is preparing for its first legal challenge in federal court.
The Stop Woke Act was an oppressive anti-education bill passed by the Florida legislature and signed by the governor this year to stifle true education on racism, sexism, trans, and homophobia. Basically, the bill would water down the ugly truths of America's past and present to preserve the comfort of students and privileged identities. It will also impact diversity, equity, and inclusion programs in private workplaces.
The Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, a nonpartisan nonprofit, is leading the cause to fight this horrible law in court on free speech grounds. Interestingly enough, this group has previously sided with the governor, but this time they're in opposition.
We predicted First Amendment challenges would likely result, and we will keep our eyes on this issue.
Finally, looking into the property insurance market problem in Florida, the governor's newsroom announced on May 26th that the governor has signed bipartisan legislation to reform Florida property insurance.
Some of the reforms included, according to the governor's office, are $150 million for the My Safe Florida Home program, a grant program for certain Florida homeowners requiring insurance companies to provide reasonable explanations for partial or full claim denials, and prohibiting insurance companies from denying coverage solely due to roof age if the roof is less than 15 years old, among other provisions.
Tell us in the comments, homeowners, do you think these reforms do anything to help you? What do you think?
Governor DeSantis approved a $109.9 billion budget after vetoing a $3.13 billion from the approved budget, according to News4Jax.
Included in the vetoes was $650 million for a new 4,500-bed prison. We're always happy to see that kind of project get vetoed. The governor also vetoed $50 million on a courthouse construction project and $35 million for a sports complex in Pasco County.
He also vetoed $31.3 million for airplanes intended to help with state leader traveling, and a $1 billion hedge fund designed to help the state government manage the economic impact of inflation.
Like most state laws, the budget goes into effect on July 1st.
Listen, we covered a lot this month. It's overwhelming for sure, but we need everyone paying attention on board. Until next time, I'm Megan.
And I'm Andy. Please be sure to like, comment, and share. For reals, I check. Thanks for tuning in.